In August, the New York heat wave was a world away, held at bay by the thick, crystal glass windows of the Plaza Hotel. Inside the grand ballroom, the air conditioning was a perfect, cool whisper. 10,000 white and champagne roses, flown in from the Netherlands, formed a fragrant ocean. Crystal chandeliers refracted the brilliant light, casting a glow on the meticulously composed smiles of every guest. This was the wedding of the century. Jason Sterling-Rhodes, heir to Sterling-Rhodes Capital, and Charlotte Van Dyke, the youngest daughter of Van Dyke Industries. One was a Wall Street wunderkind who could command the markets with a flick of his wrist, the other, a cherished darling of Manhattan's high society. To the outside world, their union was a perfect match, a celestial alignment, and more importantly, a monumental merger of two powerhouse dynasties. Jason stood at the center of the petal-strewn stage. His Tom Ford tuxedo was impeccably tailored, his posture as straight and unyielding as a great pine. His features were devastatingly handsome, and his deep-set eyes, usually as still and cold as a winter lake, now held a carefully measured warmth as he watched his bride approach. Charlotte clutched the skirt of her ethereal Vera Wang gown, her face beneath the veil a picture of exquisite shyness. With each step down the red carpet, her eyes were fixed on the man who was about to become her husband. He was so perfect that possessing him felt like possessing the entire world. Jason Sterling-Rhodes, do you take Charlotte Van Dyke to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer, to love and to cherish, till death do you part? The officiant's solemn voice echoed through the hall that Jason's lips parted slightly. His voice was low and magnetic. I do. Those two words drew a wave of benevolent applause and cheers from the guests. The officiant turned to Charlotte, a standard smile on his face. Charlotte Van Dyke, do you take Jason Sterling-Rhodes? At that moment, with all eyes upon her, the jarring, inappropriate ring of a cell phone cut through the air. The sound came from the small clutch hidden within Charlotte's bouquet. Every head turned, a flicker of surprise in their eyes. The color drained from Charlotte's face, leaving it a ghastly white. She fumbled for the phone, her pupils contracting violently when she saw the name flashing on the screen, Leo Vance. Her first instinct was to decline, but the ringing persisted, as insistent as a death knell. Charlie? Jason's voice held a note of inquiry. The carefully measured warmth in his eyes seemed to crack. Charlotte looked up, meeting his bottomless gaze, and a wave of panic seized her. Her hand trembling, she answered the call and pressed the phone to her ear. A choked, hysterical sob came from the other end. Charlie, if you really marry him, I'll jump. I'm on the roof right now. I'm only giving you half an hour. Leo, don't do anything stupid. Charlotte cried out, completely forgetting where she was. The entire ballroom fell into a dead silence, followed by a wave of suppressed gasps and murmurs. The bride, at her own wedding, had just taken a call from another man, a man who was apparently threatening to kill himself over her. It was shaping up to be the biggest high society scandal of the year. The faces of Charlotte's parents, Arthur and Catherine Van Dyke, turned a deep shade of crimson. They wished the ground would swallow them whole. That Charlotte's mind was a blank. On one side was the man she deeply loved, the man to whom she was about to entrust her life. On the other was her best friend, the man who claimed he couldn't live without her. She looked at Jason. His face was now a blank mask, the warmth in his deep eyes extinguished, replaced by a chilling, sure gaze. Jason, she stammered, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Then, she made a decision that left everyone utterly stunned. Charlotte gathered the skirt of her priceless gown and, without a second thought, turned and fled. She ran back down the red carpet, a frantic blur, and burst through the ballroom doors. She had run from her own wedding. In front of the entire world, she had abandoned her groom. Jason Sterling-Rhodes, Charlotte's desperate, fleeing figure was a resounding slap in the face to everyone present, especially the Van Dyke and Sterling-Rhodes families. The crystal chandeliers still sparkled, the roses still perfumed the air, but the atmosphere was thick with an excruciating, palpable embarrassment. Guests exchanged bewildered glances, their whispers rising like an incoming tide. My God, did I just see that? Did the Van Dyke girl just run for it? Who was that on the phone? It sounded like a man. This is a massive humiliation for Sterling-Rhodes capital. Jason must be furious. Charlotte's mother, Catherine Van Dyke, nearly fainted, held up only by her husband, Arthur. His face was ashen. He stared at the lone figure on the stage, his lips trembling, unable to utter a single word. Every camera, every gaze, was now fixed on the abandoned groom. People expected to see rage, shock, a loss of composure. They saw none of it. He just stood there, as still and perfect as a marble statue. His handsome face betrayed no emotion, only a terrifying calm. The calmer he appeared, the more a chill ran down everyone's spine. After a full 30 seconds, just as the flustered officiant was about to attempt some damage control, Jason moved. He slowly raised a hand, removed the rose from his lapel, and let it drop to the floor. The delicate flower was instantly crushed under the heel of his expensive leather shoe. Then, he stepped forward and took the microphone from the officiant's hand. The hall fell silent. Everyone held their breath, waiting. Jason scanned the crowd, his gaze sweeping over the varied expressions of the guests before finally landing on the deathly pale faces of Arthur and Catherine Van Dyke. His lips parted, and his voice, though not loud, was carried by the microphone to every corner of the ballroom, each word a shard of ice. "Thank you all for taking the time to be here today." He paused, his deep eyes devoid of any ripple. "But I regret to inform you that today's wedding is hereby concluded." He paused again, as if giving them a moment to process, before dropping an even bigger bomb. "My engagement to Miss Charlotte Van Dyke is null and void. From this moment on, we have no relation." There was no hysterical questioning, no messy plea for her to return. Only a declaration, delivered with a calm so profound it was cruel. This wasn't just canceling a wedding. It was, in front of all of New York's high society, a complete and utter severance of ties with the Van Dyke family, nailing them to a pillar of shame. Arthur Van Dyke's vision went black, and he nearly collapsed. Catherine let out a shriek. "Jason, let us explain. It's Charlie. She's just being foolish." But Jason didn't spare them another glance. He placed the microphone gently back on its stand and adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke suit, as if he had just concluded a tedious business meeting. Then, under the complex gaze of shock, pity, and schadenfreude, he strode off the stage and disappeared through a side door. Never looking back, he left behind him a resolute silhouette and the Van Dyke family, now the laughingstock of the city. Charlotte, her elaborate gown in her hands, her feet aching in 4-inch heels, ran from the hotel in a state of disheveled panic. She didn't have a moment to consider the consequences of her shocking actions. There was only one thought in her mind. She couldn't let anything happen to Leo. She hailed a cab and gave an address she knew all too well. 40 minutes later, the taxi pulled up to a top-tier luxury apartment building in Tribeca. Charlotte practically tumbled out of the car. Ignoring her tangled hair and ruined dress, she rushed into the building and took the private elevator to the penthouse duplex. The door opened to her fingerprint. The apartment was a wreck. Expensive wine bottles were shattered on the floor, the air thick with the pungent smell of alcohol. "Leo? Leo?" Charlotte's heart was in her throat, her voice trembling with fear that a figure staggered in from the terrace. Leo Vance, dressed in a loose white shirt, his hair a mess, his handsome face streaked with tears and despair. He wasn't holding a blade, but a shallow, no longer bleeding scratch was visible on his wrist, a shocking sight. Seeing Charlotte in her wedding dress, he first froze. Then, as if provoked, his eyes turned bloodshot and he roared, "What are you doing here? Aren't you supposed to be exchanging rings with your groom? Get out! Get out! Are you insane?" Charlotte rushed toward him, her own tears finally breaking free, a mixture of anger and heartache. "Why would you do this? Do you have any idea what day it is?" "I know. Of course I know." Leo grabbed her by the shoulders, shaking her forcefully. "It's because I know that I wanted to die. I'd rather die than watch you marry someone else." "Charlie, tell me, why are you marrying him? Didn't we promise we'd be together forever? We're best friends. We're family." Charlotte cried in defense. "Leo, I love you, but it's the love of a sister, not a lover. Why can't you understand that?" "I don't understand, and I don't want to." Leo's emotions spiraled out of control. He pulled Charlotte into a crushing embrace, so tight she could barely breathe, his hot tears falling onto her neck. "I only want you, Charlie. Without you, I'll really die. His pathological dependence and obsession were an invisible net, trapping her completely. She gave up struggling, letting him hold her. Guilt, pity, and a sliver of satisfaction at being needed, a feeling she hadn't even acknowledged in herself, made it impossible for her to push him away. She had ruined her own wedding, betrayed the man she truly loved. But looking at the fragile, childlike Leo in her arms, she felt that if she hadn't come, he really would have jumped. This so-called life-or-death choice had been a meticulously planned kidnapping from the start, a kidnapping of her kindness and her sense of responsibility. The next day, the news, Van Dyke heiress flees wedding at the altar, spread like a virus across the internet and social media. Van Dyke Industries' stock plummeted the moment the market opened. Charlotte hadn't slept. Her eyes were red and swollen. She had stayed at Leo's apartment all night, watching over him until he fell into a deep sleep. At dawn, ignoring the countless calls from her parents, she left that suffocating place in a daze. She had to see Jason. She had to. Jason's private residence was a magnificent, modern house on the Upper East Side, its security as formidable and its style as severe as the man himself. The solid black iron gate was an impassable barrier. Charlotte rang the bell for a long time before a butler with a stony expression appeared. "Miss Van Dyke, Mr. Sterling-Rhodes does not wish to see you. Please, I'm begging you, just let me see him. Just for a moment," Charlotte pleaded, all her usual heiress pride gone. As they stood at a stalemate, a low voice came from inside. "Let her in." It was Jason. Charlotte's heart leaped. She felt as if she'd grabbed a final lifeline as she hurried after the butler. The interior of the house was a minimalist landscape of black, white, and gray, vast, cold, and devoid of any warmth. Jason was sitting before the enormous floor-to-ceiling windows in the living room, dressed in comfortable gray loungewear, a cup of coffee in his hand, calmly gazing at the manicured lawn outside. It was as if yesterday's earth-shattering drama had nothing to do with him. "Jason." Charlotte walked toward him, her voice choked with emotion. "I'm sorry." Jason didn't turn around. He didn't even look at her. He just gave a soft, non-committal The calmer he was, the more her heart sank. She would have preferred him to rage at her, anything but this complete and utter indifference. Yesterday, it was Leo. He said he was going to kill himself, she explained incoherently. "I was scared he'd really do it. I didn't mean to embarrass you. Jason, believe me, you're the one I love." She moved around to face him, sinking to her knees, looking up at his flawless profile, tears falling like broken pearls. "Can we have another wedding?" "No, we don't have to. We can just go get the license. As long as you can forgive me, I'll do anything." Jason finally turned his head slowly, his gaze falling on her haggard face. His expression was complex. The coldness from the wedding was gone, as was the tenderness from before. In its place was something else, something akin to pity. He reached out, his thumb gently wiping a tear from her cheek. The gesture was impossibly soft. "Is it worth it? Getting yourself into this state for an irrelevant man?" His voice was quiet, laced with a sigh. Charlotte froze, stunned by his reaction. "He's not irrelevant. He's my best friend." "Is he?" Jason interrupted her, a faint, unreadable curve on his lips. "A friend who threatened suicide on your wedding day." Charlotte was speechless. Jason stood up, walked to the bar, and poured her a glass of warm water. "Go home," he said. "Let everyone cool down. There's a lot to deal with at the company." "So, does that mean you forgive me?" Charlotte asked timidly, clutching the glass. Jason looked at her, the emotions in his deep, unreadable eyes swirling before settling back into a calm pool. He didn't answer directly. He only said, "Charlie, in my eyes, you've always been a child who hasn't grown up." With that, he turned and went upstairs, leaving her with a solitary, resolute back. Charlotte sat there, stunned, replaying his last words in her mind. He hadn't said he forgave her, but he hadn't said he never would. He called her a child. It sounded more like a reluctant tolerance, an indulgence. A sliver of hope reignited in her deadened heart. She didn't know that after she left, Jason stood in his second-floor study, watching her walk away in a daze. The moment she was out of sight, the pity and warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by a hatred as cold and sharp as poisoned steel. The game had only just begun. Jason's study was a world away from the cold, hard black and white of the downstairs. This was not a space for guests, It was his true domain. An entire wall was a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf filled with original editions on finance, law, and psychology. The air held no scent of coffee, only the faint, almost imperceptible fragrance of gardenias. It was Eleanor's favorite scent. He walked to his desk and unlocked the top drawer. Inside, there were no documents, no cigars, only a small velvet box. He opened it. A simple, elegant diamond ring lay inside. Next to a slightly yellowed photographed eye in the photo, under the bridge of Sighs in Oxford, a girl with a smile as bright as the sun was on her tiptoes, kissing the cheek of the tall, handsome young man beside her. The girl's eyes held all the light in the world. The young man was Jason, 2 years prior, his expression filled with an undisguised adoration meant only for her. His thumb gently caressed the girl's face in the picture. Eleanor. Eleanor Van Dyke. The name was carved into his heart, and every time he whispered it, it was like tracing the old wound with a knife, drawing fresh blood. The tide of memory engulfed him. 2 years ago. He was still the rebellious heir to Sterling-Rhodes capital, sent to study in England by his family, where he met the only light of his life. Eleanor Van Dyke, the eldest daughter of Van Dyke Industries, was gentle, brilliant, and kind, like a magnolia standing in serene solitude. Like him, she was the child of a powerful family, yet she possessed none of the arrogance. She would stay up with him in the library, poring over the driest financial models, and she would play Debussy for him on the gentle currents of the River Charwell. It was she who had soothed the turbulence in his soul, who had first taught him the meaning of love, of home. Before returning to the States, he had planned an elaborate proposal. There, under that very bridge of sighs, he had knelt on one knee and placed this ring on her finger. "Eleanor," he had said, looking into her tear-filled eyes, "as soon as I get things settled back home, I'm coming to marry you. I'll give you the grandest wedding the world has ever seen." She had nodded, tears streaming down her face, smiling like a child. "Jason, I'll wait for you." He returned to New York 2 months ahead of her to clear away any obstacles, to build a perfect future for her with his own hands. He counted down the days until her return, sketching out designs for their marital home over and over again. That day finally came. He stood at the International Arrivals Gate at JFK, holding the largest bouquet of white roses, and spotted her instantly. The figure he had longed for. She was a little thinner, but her smile was as radiant as ever. He pushed through the crowd and pulled her into a tight embrace, as if to merge her into his very bones. "Welcome home, my fiancé." That night, they returned to the apartment he had prepared for them. 2 months of longing ignited in an instant. Clothes were shed in a trail from the entryway to the living room, to the bedroom. Outside the window was the glittering New York skyline. Inside, 2 lovers, lost in each other until dawn. The next morning, Jason awoke to find Eleanor lying on his chest, her fingertips tracing the lines of his brow. "Do you have to go to the office today?" she asked softly, her voice still husky with sleep. There's an important meeting," Jason said, kissing her forehead. "What about you? Any plans?" "I'm meeting a friend, and then maybe I'll go look at wedding dresses," she said, her eyes sparkling with anticipation for their future. "I'll make you dinner tonight." "Okay," he promised with a smile, his heart full. He thought this was the beginning of his future, happy and secure. But what awaited him was not a warm dinner, but a cold phone call that plunged him into an icy abyss. That afternoon, he was in a top-floor conference room at Sterling-Rhodes Capital, listening to a subordinate's report. His phone vibrated. It was an unknown number. He declined it, but the caller was persistent. Annoyed, he stepped out of the room to answer. The voice on the other end was the cold, formulaic tone of a police officer. "Is this Mr. Jason Sterling-Rhodes?" The owner of the vehicle with license plate New York XXXXX, Miss Eleanor Van Dyke, was in a serious car accident on her way to the West Side Highway. "You are listed as her emergency contact." He couldn't hear a single word after that. He raced to the hospital like a madman. The light outside the operating room was on for 8 hours. In the end, it went out. The doctor emerged, wearily removing his mask, and shook his head. In that moment, Jason's world collapsed. All the light in his life was extinguished on the day of the funeral. The rain was torrential, as if the entire world wept for her. Jason, dressed in black, stood in a corner like a soulless statue. He attended as Eleanor's classmate from abroad, because their engagement had not yet been announced in the States. He watched Arthur Van Dyke's hair turn white overnight, watched the guests offer their hollow condolences, his heart numb. Just as he was about to leave, he overheard a conversation between Catherine Van Dyke and her daughter, Charlotte. At that time, Charlotte was sobbing inconsolably. "Mom, how could Eleanor just be gone? I'm so sad." Catherine hugged her daughter, dabbing her tears with a handkerchief. Her voice was low, but every word carried to Jason's ears. There, don't cry, my silly girl." There was no grief in Catherine's voice, only a chilling, triumphant reassurance. "Your sister is gone, and Mommy is sad too. But think about it. From now on, all of Van Dyke Industries will be yours." Charlotte seemed stunned by her mother's words and momentarily forgot to cry. Catherine, thinking they were alone, continued to spew her venom. "That car accident, the man I hired handled it cleanly. He was a truck driver with $1 million in gambling debt. The police investigation ruled it a traffic accident. Don't worry, no one will ever find out." A bolt of lightning seemed to strike Jason's mind. He snapped his head up, his eyes locking onto Catherine's elegant, composed face. There was not a shred of a mother's grief there, only the vicious greed of a successful schemer. It wasn't an accident. The treasure he held in the palm of his hand, the love he had sworn to protect for a lifetime, had been murdered by this woman, this venomous creature, all to pave the way for her own daughter. In that instant, all his grief froze. In its place, a towering inferno of hatred, born from the depths of hell, rose up, strong enough to burn everything to the ground. He looked at the still sniffling, naive, and foolish Charlotte in the distance. A crazed plan for revenge began to form in his ravaged heart. That a chime from his computer pulled Jason back from the hell of his memories. It was a new email notification. He closed the drawer, locking away all his tenderness and vulnerability. When he looked up again, his deep eyes held nothing but cold calculation. He opened the email. It was the latest file from his private investigator. The subject line read, "Van Dyke Industries' internal financial loopholes and Catherine Van Dyke's associated account details." A cruel, cold smile touched Jason's lips. "Catherine Van Dyke, Charlotte Van Dyke, the entire Van Dyke family. You will repay the debt you owe Eleanor with the fall of your entire dynasty. I will take everything you hold dear, and I will make you taste the bitterness of betrayal and destitution. In this game, I am the only dealer." A week after the wedding fiasco, Jason called Charlotte. His voice was back to its usual warmth, with no trace of anything amiss. He said that the storm would pass, and that to appease their parents and send a signal of reconciliation to the public, he wanted to come to the Van Dyke estate for a quiet dinner. For Charlotte, the call was like rain in a drought. Overjoyed, she immediately told her parents. Catherine and Arthur breathed a huge sigh of relief, believing Jason had chosen to forgive and prioritize the bigger picture. On Saturday evening, Jason arrived at the Van Dyke estate in Greenwich, carrying a carefully selected gift. "Arthur, Catherine," he said with a smile, his demeanor respectful and humble, as if he weren't the same man who had made that cold pronouncement at the wedding. "Oh, Jason, come in, come in." Catherine beamed, her face creased with a welcoming smile as she ushered him in. "We're so happy you could come." Arthur forced a smile and patted his shoulder. "Jason, my boy, Charlie was foolish. You've been wronged." "You're too kind, Arthur," Jason said with a faint smile. "Charlie is just naive. She was taken advantage of." His gaze shifted meaningfully to Leo Vance, who had been brought along by Charlotte today. Leo met Jason's eyes and immediately bristled like a cat whose tail had been stepped on, his expression full of hostility and defiance. Charlotte quickly intervened. "Jason, Leo, he came specifically to apologize to you." Jason raised an eyebrow noncommittally and turned his attention to the dinner table. The atmosphere at the dinner was almost painfully harmonious, thanks to Catherine's deliberate efforts. She constantly served Jason food, fussing over him, her words dripping with satisfaction for her future son-in-law. Jason maintained his perfect composure, accepting Catherine's overtures, answering Arthur's business questions fluently, and even magnanimously clinking glasses with Leo. During the meal, he casually brought up a major real estate project in Hudson Yards that Van Dyke Industries was currently bidding for. "I hear you're very interested in that Hudson Yards parcel, Arthur." Arthur sighed. Yes, it's the cornerstone of our next 5-year plan. But the competition is fierce, and our capital flow has been a bit tight lately. Jason put down his fork, dabbed his mouth with a napkin, and smiled. Sterling-Rhodes can help with the capital. After all, we'll be one family soon. Those words made the eyes of the three Van Dykes light up instantly. Catherine excitedly jumped in. Jason, are you serious? That would be wonderful. Only Leo snorted from the side, muttering to Charlotte. Look at him, acting like he's doing charity. So what if he has a few bucks? Does the Van Dyke family need his help? Charlotte shot him a glare, signaling him to be quiet. Jason acted as if he hadn't heard them. He raised his wine glass to Arthur. However, I've heard your biggest competitor for this project is Lee Corporation. Their methods are notoriously aggressive. You should be careful, Arthur. He appeared to be offering a friendly warning, but he was subtly guiding the conversation, probing for Van Dyke Industries' weaknesses and Arthur's strategies. Arthur, suspecting nothing and treating Jason as one of his own, laid out his entire plan after a few glasses of wine. Jason listened with a smile, nodding in agreement from time to time, but his deep eyes glinted with the cold, excited light of a hunter who has spotted his prey. The information he needed, the opening he was looking for, was being delivered to him, piece by piece, by his own enemies. The disingenuous dinner was a resounding success. When he left, Charlotte walked him to the door, reluctant to see him go. Jason, thank you, she said, looking up at him, her eyes full of adoration and worship. Jason gently stroked her hair, just as he had done countless times before. Silly girl, he said softly. Get some rest. Watching his car drive away, Charlotte felt like the happiest person in the world. She thought she had won back her love. She would never know that the moment Jason's car left the Van Dyke estate, the tenderness on his face vanished completely. He took out his phone and dialed a number. Hello. I need you to track all of Lee Corp's recent capital movements. Also, send the plan we prepared for short-selling Van Dyke Industries to Leo Vance's email. And remember, do it anonymously. Make him think it's a gift from heaven. Leo Vance was still fuming when he got back to his apartment. That so-called family dinner had been, in his eyes, a complete and utter humiliation. Jason's condescending, all-knowing attitude and the undisguised worship in Charlotte's eyes were like sharp needles stabbing at his ego. Why? Why was Jason Sterling-Rhodes born with everything, entitled to dictate the fate of others' careers? Why could he so easily steal the girl Leo had protected for over 20 years? Leo hurled an expensive crystal glass against the wall, and it shattered. One day I'll show you. I, Leo Vance, am 100 times better than you, he roared into the empty living room. Just then, his laptop chimed with a new email notification. He walked over irritably, intending to delete it, but the subject line caught his eye. A gift for the enemy of Van Dyke Industries. The sender was anonymous. Frowning, Leo clicked it open, as if guided by some unseen force. The email was short but packed with information. Using highly professional financial jargon and data models, it precisely analyzed a fatal structural flaw in the Hudson Yards project that Van Dyke Industries was pouring all its resources into. The email asserted that once this flaw was discovered by competitors or the market, Van Dyke stock would plummet by at least 30% in a short period. At the end, it included a detailed, step-by-step plan to short the stock. The sophistication of the strategy and the precision of its timing left Leo, who considered himself financially savvy, in awe. Could this be real? Leo's heart pounded in his chest. The email was like a devil's lure, perfectly tailored to his feelings of resentment, jealousy, and ambition. He longed to prove himself, especially to prove to Charlotte that he was better than Jason. He hated Jason and wanted nothing more than to see his face contorted in defeat when Van Dyke Industries collapsed. If this plan was real, it was a God-sent opportunity. Not only could he make a fortune, but he could also appear before Charlotte as her savior and tell her she had chosen the wrong man. Reason told him that this unsolicited email was incredibly risky, likely a trap. But blinded by jealousy, he could no longer hear the voice of reason. He studied the short-selling plan over and over, and the more he looked, the more flawless it seemed. He even began to delude himself into thinking that some financial titan, wronged by the Van Dykes or Sterling-Rhodes, was secretly extending an olive branch to him. Fortune favors the bold. Leo slammed his hand on the table, his eyes becoming feverish and obsessive that he began to act. He invested all his own money and concocted various excuses to swindle a large sum from his wealthy parents. Hiding it from everyone, he opened an offshore account and, following the email's instructions, began to carefully, step by step, short the stock of Van Dyke Industries. With each transaction, he felt an unprecedented thrill, the pleasure of controlling the fate of others. When Charlotte called, noticing his recent secretive and euphoric behavior, she asked with concern what he was up to. He dodged her questions. "Charlie, just you wait. I'm preparing a huge surprise. Soon, all of New York will know that I, Leo Vance, am the one who truly deserves you." He was lost in his fantasy of achieving fame and winning the girl, completely unaware that he had become a pawn, precisely calculated and disposable, in someone else's game. Every dollar he used to attack the Van Dykes would become another nail in the family's coffin, and he himself was walking, step by step, into an abyss from which there was no return, while his pawn, Leo Vance, was busy stirring up the financial markets. Jason's attention was no longer on that small stage. Leo's actions were merely a smokescreen in his revenge plot, designed to create chaos and distract the Van Dyke family. His true target had always been singular: Catherine Van Dyke. That afternoon, he received a call from his private investigator, whose voice was tight with excitement. "Mr. Sterling-Rhodes. We found him. Where is he?" Jason's voice was devoid of emotion. "In a slum in a neighboring city. His name is Wong Hu. He's had a rough couple of years. The money Catherine Van Dyke gave him, he lost it all gambling and is drowning in debt to loan sharks. He's living off odd jobs and hiding from creditors." "Good." Jason hung up, a cold glint in his eyes. He didn't delegate the task. He drove himself to that seedy, dangerous neighborhood. The meeting was set in a dim, greasy tea house. Jason, dressed in an expensive, hand-tailored Italian suit, was completely out of place. The man named Wong, who was already there when he arrived. He wore a yellowed undershirt, his face gaunt, his eyes shifty, reeking of cheap alcohol and despair. Jason's commanding presence made Wong Hu even more uneasy. Jason wasted no time. He sat down, took a photo from his pocket, and pushed it across the table. It was a photo of Eleanor, her smile radiant. The moment Wong Hu saw the photo, he looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. His face went pale, and the hand holding his teacup trembled violently. Who are you?" he stammered. "Who I am is not important," Jason said, leaning back in his chair, his legs crossed elegantly. His words, however, were like daggers to the heart. "What's important is that on the afternoon of August 12th, 2 years ago, on the West Side Highway, you drove an overloaded truck into the car of the girl in this photo. Am I correct?" Cold sweat beaded on Wong Hu's forehead. He denied it vehemently. "I don't know what you're talking about. It was an accident. The police already closed the case." "An accident?" Jason chuckled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "An accident that resulted in a broke, degenerate gambler like you suddenly having $2 million in his bank account." Wong Hu's defenses crumbled. He dropped to his knees with a thud. "Boss, I was wrong. I didn't mean to. It was that woman. She forced me. She said she'd pay off all my gambling debts and give me a huge sum of money. I was possessed." "Which woman?" Jason asked, feigning ignorance, his voice laced with a playful cruelty. "Catherine Van Dyke, the wife of the chairman of Van Dyke Industries." Jason stood up, looking down at him as if he were an insect. "I'm going to give you 2 choices. First, you give me all the evidence of your transaction with Catherine Van Dyke. In return, I'll give you a new identity and enough money to live comfortably abroad for the rest of your life, free from the loan sharks hunting you." He paused, his gaze turning sharp. "Second, I call the police right now and hand you over. Or, I could leak your location to your creditors. I imagine they would be very happy to find you, and then chop you into pieces and throw you in the Hudson River." Overwhelming fear and a sudden glimmer of hope warred within Wong Hu's mind, a mind long corroded by alcohol and gambling. Without a moment's hesitation, he kowtowed, tears and snot streaming down his face. "I choose the first one. The first one. I kept the evidence. I knew that venomous bitch couldn't be trusted. I had to have a backup plan." From inside his clothes, he pulled out an old-fashioned voice recorder, wrapped tightly in a plastic bag, and a slip of paper with bank transaction details. Jason took the recorder and pressed play. After a crackle of static, Catherine Van Dyke's familiar, venomous voice came through clearly. "What I need you to do is create an accident, one that no one can trace back. I'll pay you 1 million up front and another million after it's done." That was the voice. The voice he had heard at the funeral, the voice that had destroyed his life. Jason closed his eyes, his hand clenching the small recorder so tightly his knuckles turned white. A tidal wave of hatred and gut-wrenching grief surged through him. "Eleanor, did you hear that? I have the evidence. Soon, I will send everyone who ever hurt you to hell to keep you company." September was crisp and clear. Van Dyke Industries was holding its annual flagship product launch at the Javits Center. It was their most important PR event of the year, and all of New York's media and business elite were in attendance. Arthur Van Dyke hoped to use the occasion to dispel the gloom from the wedding fiasco and restore market confidence. Catherine, dressed in an expensive Chanel suit, moved gracefully among the guests, a flawless smile plastered on her face. Charlotte sat quietly in the audience, her gaze frequently drifting to an empty seat in the VIP section. Jason had promised he would come at 2 o'clock sharp. The presentation began. Arthur Van Dyke, looking invigorated, walked onto the stage and began to introduce the company's strategic core for the year, an AI chip developed in partnership with an overseas tech firm. However, halfway through his speech, a commotion began to stir in the press section. "Oh my God! Check your phones. Van Dyke stock, it's crashing." The whispers grew louder. Some financial reporters had already forgotten the presentation and were frantically typing on their laptops. At almost the same moment, everyone's phone began to buzz with emergency alerts from news outlets. Frowny face breaking. Van Dyke Industries stock in freefall, plummets over 40% in half an hour. Rumors of massive deficit in Van Dyke's Hudson Yards project trigger aggressive short selling by institutional investors. On stage, Arthur sensed something was wrong. His secretary, her face pale, rushed up and whispered something in his ear. Arthur swayed, nearly falling. He forced himself to remain calm and spoke into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. This is just..." Before he could finish, the rear doors of the convention hall were pushed open. Several uniformed, grim-faced NYPD officers strode through the crowd and directly onto the stage. The lead officer ignored the stunned Arthur and walked straight to Catherine Van Dyke. He showed her a warrant, his voice as cold as ice. "Catherine Van Dyke, you are under suspicion in connection with a homicide case from 2 years ago, as well as multiple counts of financial fraud and embezzlement. Please come with us." The hall erupted. Camera flashes went off like a frenzy of lightning, every lens aimed at Catherine, whose face had instantly lost all color. "No, you've made a mistake. I didn't do it," she shrieked hysterically, her elegant facade torn to shreds. "Arthur, help me. Arthur." Arthur stared at the unbelievable scene before him, then glanced at the breaking news alerts on his phone about his wife hiring a hitman to murder his own eldest daughter. His vision went black, and a metallic taste filled his throat. He clutched his chest and collapsed. "Dad!" Charlotte screamed, rushing onto the stage, her world spinning. She couldn't understand how everything had fallen apart. In the chaos, she instinctively searched the crowd for the one person who was supposed to be her rock, and then she saw him. Jason Sterling-Rhodes was standing in the shadows by the entrance. He hadn't come in, merely watching the tragedy he had personally directed unfold on stage, a cold, detached observer. His face was expressionless, but in his deep, bottomless eyes, Charlotte could clearly read a thick layer of coldness. A chill ran through her entire body. The house of Van Dyke fell overnight. Catherine Van Dyke was held in custody, the evidence against her irrefutable. A long prison sentence awaited. Arthur Van Dyke suffered a major stroke. Though doctors saved his life, he was left half paralyzed and unable to speak. Van Dyke Industries, battered by the stock crash and the scandal, was forced into bankruptcy by its creditors. Leo Vance was also finished. Labeled a fool and a traitor, he was socially ostracized. To cover his losses from illegal insider trading and market manipulation, his father had to liquidate half the family's assets. Charlotte went from a high-society princess to a nobody in an instant. She sold all her designer bags and jewelry just to cover her father's medical bills. She sat in the hospital, watching the once powerful man lie helpless in bed, reading the sordid news about her mother on her phone, feeling completely numbed out. A week later, she received a call from Jason's lawyer. He informed her that the penthouse they had prepared as their marital home had been seized by Jason, and that she needed to come and collect her personal belongings. That magnificent residence overlooking the river, once her most beautiful dream, Charlotte went. The apartment was empty. All of her things were packed in boxes and piled in the middle of the living room like unclaimed garbage. Jason was sitting on the sofa, a glass of red wine in his hand, calmly looking out at the view. Seeing him, all of Charlotte's numbness, grief, and confusion instantly morphed into a towering rage. "It was you, wasn't it?" she screamed, rushing toward him, her voice hoarse. "You designed all of this." Jason swirled the liquid in his glass, not turning around. He just gave a soft, non-committal That quiet admission was more devastating than any denial. "Why?" she cried, tears streaming down her face. "We were about to get married. I loved you so much. Why would you do this to me? Why would you do this to my family?" Jason finally turned his head slowly. He stood up and walked toward her, step by step. For the first time, he dropped his mask of gentleness. His eyes were as cold as daggers, filled with undisguised hatred and contempt. "You love me?" he scoffed, his laughter dripping with mockery. "Charlotte, what right do you have to speak to me of love?" He leaned in close, his voice a cruel whisper only she could hear. "Because I was supposed to be your brother-in-law." Charlotte froze, as if struck by lightning, staring at him in disbelief. What did you say?" "Eleanor Van Dyke." Jason enunciated each syllable of the name. "My fiancé. The girl who was murdered by your venomous mother so she could pave the way for you." He watched the color drain from Charlotte's face, the curve of his lips growing more cruel. "I got close to you. I was good to you. I proposed to you. Also that you and your greedy mother would let your guard down. I made you fall in love with me, only to destroy everything you had at the moment of your greatest happiness, so you could taste what it's like to fall from heaven into hell. Your escape from the wedding, Leo's stupidity, the bankruptcy of your family, your mother's imprisonment, all of it was part of my revenge. Charlotte, you and your entire family have paid the price for Eleanor's death. Now, the game is over." The truth was the sharpest of swords, slicing Charlotte to pieces. All the tender caresses, the vows of love, the happiness she thought she had, it was all a lie. From the very beginning, she had been nothing more than a pathetic, laughable substitute, a tool for his revenge. She stumbled backward, knocking over a box, and collapsed onto the floor, letting out a broken, desperate sob. Jason watched her with the cold indifference of a stranger. He drained the rest of his wine and threw the empty glass to the floor, where it shattered, just like he had shattered Charlotte's self-indulgent dream of love. Then, he turned and walked away, never looking back. The fall of the House of Van Dyke was the biggest story in New York that autumn. Catherine Van Dyke was convicted of premeditated murder, financial fraud, and a host of other charges, and sentenced to life in prison. It was said that when she heard the verdict, she became hysterical, losing all trace of her former high society composure. Arthur Van Dyke languished in the hospital, his once mighty business empire reduced to a few cold lines in a bankruptcy notice. He couldn't speak, couldn't move, and could only stare at the ceiling day after day, lost in either repentance or despair. Leo Vance's fate was equally grim. Labeled a fool and a traitor, he was completely ostracized. The Vance family was crippled by the financial fallout, falling from the upper echelons of society, never to recover their former glory. As for Charlotte, after that final confrontation with Jason, she simply disappeared. Some said the shock had driven her mad. Others said she had moved abroad alone, changing her name, never to return. She was like a shooting star in Jason's revenge plot, burning brightly for a moment before turning to cosmic dust, forgotten by all. Everything had settled. Jason stood in his CEO's office on the top floor of the Sterling-Rhodes building. Beyond the massive windows, the lights of Manhattan glittered, as bustling and prosperous as ever that he had won. He had single-handedly destroyed a powerful dynasty, sending all his enemies to the hell they deserved. But there was no joy in his heart, not a single spark of triumph. When the flames of revenge died down, what remained was not satisfaction, but an emptiness deeper and heavier than anything he had felt in the past 2 years. It was a vast black hole that consumed all his emotions, leaving him unable to feel sadness or happiness. He had avenged Eleanor, but the girl who could share everything with him would never come back. The world was still full of noise and people, but she was no longer in it. On a winter afternoon, the sun offered no warmth. A cemetery in upstate New York was quiet and still. Jason, wearing a black cashmere coat, walked alone down a path strewn with fallen leaves. In his arms, he held a large bouquet of white roses, still in bud, Eleanor's favorite. He stopped before a pristine, white marble headstone. On it, a photo of Eleanor smiled, as if she had never left. He crouched down, his fingers gently brushing a speck of dust from the photo, his touch as tender as if he were handling a priceless treasure. He carefully placed the bouquet in front of the headstone. He didn't leave. He leaned against the cold marble and slowly sat down, just as they had sat side by side on the lawns of Oxford countless times. "Eleanor," he began, his voice hoarse. "I'm here. I got revenge for you. Catherine will spend the rest of her life in prison. The House of Van Dyke is no more. Everyone who hurt you has paid the price." He spoke softly, as if reporting his victory, or perhaps just sharing his day with his beloved. "These past 2 years, I've been so tired. I was acting every single day. To Charlotte, to every member of her family. I said things I didn't mean, did things I despised. Sometimes, I'd look in the mirror and see a stranger. I used the kind of tactics you always disdained. Schemes, manipulations, I stopped at nothing. Do you think I've become a bad person? That I'm no longer the Jason you once knew?" A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, a sound like a lover's silent sigh. His eyes began to redden. "Eleanor, I did it. But I'm not happy at all. I destroyed everything they had, but you're still not back. I stand in this vast city, with more wealth and power than ever before, but I feel like I have less than nothing." He took the small velvet box from his coat pocket. He opened it. Inside was the ring he never got to place on her finger at their wedding. He clutched it tightly in his palm, and a hot tear finally escaped, tracing a silent path down his handsome face. "Eleanor, how am I supposed to go on in a world without you?" He pressed his forehead against the cold stone, his shoulders trembling slightly, like a lost child, letting out a choked, painful sob. The weak sunlight filtered through the bare branches, casting mottled shadows on him. His hatred had ended with the fall of his enemies, but his love and his longing would accompany him in this endless solitude until the very end of his life.